Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that's going to be a more nuanced topic, and that is this idea that the squat improves the deadlift. And I want to state up front, in many cases, yes, the squat will improve the deadlift, and in many cases they'll scale to a certain extent. But one of the things that I think we notice, and something I've talked about in the past, is that the more experienced we become as lifters, the closer the gap comes between the two. Other than people who have certain biomechanical disadvantages on one versus the other, the majority of lifters with normal size structures, if they train long enough and hard enough and put on enough muscle tissue, their squat and deadlift are going to get very, very close, if not equal. It is very common for a lot of elite lifters to squat and deadlift the same amount of weight, or very, very, very close, within 5%. It's more common than you would think, especially when we get out of the really light weights. So what you end up finding here is that over time, their squat goes up more than their deadlift does. It's not exactly carrying over. Now, is it to say that early on, squatting will help with the deadlift? You bet it will. Why? Because it involves the quads and it involves all the hip extensors, right? In other words, every single muscle that is used in the squat is used in the deadlift, right? Every single muscle is used. The deadlift uses more total muscles. The other problem we get to is that the range of motion is different for all the joints. On a squat, you get more knee and more hip movement than you do on a deadlift, on a traditional conventional deadlift. So accordingly, the ratios are different, and the deadlift is more posterior dominant. Now, if we were to talk about the sumo deadlift, I think we can make a better case for the squat carrying over to the sumo deadlift. I think a stronger case can be made for that. But if we're talking about the conventional deadlift, the squatting really only helps with the hip extensors and the quads. Now, the hip extensors is important, and that can build a very, very good base for you to deadlift on, right? Because if you build up to a very respectable squat, all the muscles involved in hip extension are going to be fairly strong. Your hips, your glutes, to some extent hamstrings, right? Those things are all going to be strong. That will help you build a base for a deadlift. There's no doubt about that. The quads, I mean, if you want to eliminate problems with breaking the weight off the floor, quads, like on a conventional deadlift, weak quads can prevent you from breaking it off the floor, for example. Okay, they're very rarely a limit factor anywhere else. But, again, squatting can help you with that, right? It can help you with that tremendously. What's the issue that we run into? It's all the back musculature, your grip, your traps, all of that stuff. Those things are involved in the deadlift, and they can limit your deadlift. And if they're not up to speed, all the squatting in the world's not going to improve it. And anecdotally speaking, Max Adia over with Juggernaut Training Systems, I heard him discussing this many years ago. This must have been 5+ years ago. Okay, where he was saying that when he was running for weightlifting, when he was training over in Bulgaria, that he had gotten up to where he could front squat 500 pounds. Now, we come back over to that point. How many people out there are like, oh yeah, the front squat will increase your deadlift? He could front squat 500 pounds, but he had said when he tried to deadlift, he couldn't deadlift 500 pounds. Why? Because he had never practiced pulling that much weight from the floor. He didn't have the lats. He didn't have the grip strength, right? He didn't have the traps and everything else to do that. He had the lower body. He had a really strong lower body and even mid-back and everything, right? It should have given him a very strong base on the deadlift, and in theory, that should blow most people's minds because under normal circumstances, most lifters can deadlift more than they squat. And pretty much every lifter can back squat more than they front squat. So when someone talks about having a 500 front squat, the general idea, most people would think, oh yeah, that guy can deadlift 600 plus. And it would make sense because that's the normal ratios. Like we would expect a 500 front squatter to deadlift over 600 pounds. He couldn't even deadlift 500 because he didn't build up the rest of the musculature needed. He didn't have the grip. He didn't have the lats. He hadn't practiced pulling any heavy weight from the floor. Okay, and that matters in this context. So it's not always going to carry over completely. And I don't want that to discourage people, because if someone wants a strong deadlift, I would say squatting will build a lot of your foundation. But if we were to talk about the movements that are going to carry over the most, if you want me to name 2 exercises that'll really carry over to conventional deadlift, I would say good mornings and rows, right? Particularly rows from the floor. Squats will contribute. I'm not telling you not to squat. If you want a big deadlift, squatting would be a good idea. But if we want to pick exercises that will really and truly build the deadlift, the good morning and the row will carry over to the deadlift more than the squat will. Those lifts will build a deadlift. I'll go so far as to say that a person can get really, really strong on those lifts, in addition to hopefully squatting, and they'll have a very strong deadlift without ever having trained it. Again, a very strong deadlift. And I know of guys who do stuff like this. I have a friend who the other day, he was posting up on Facebook. He hasn't done a single deadlift in 5 months. Walked in and pulled 655. He hasn't done a deadlift of any type in 5 months. Hadn't bothered. Pulled 655. Because he has all the muscle strength to do it. So what we need to understand here is that as far as the squat carrying over to the deadlift, it depends upon where your weak links are. If you are weak in your lower body, if you're weak in the hip extensors or the quads, getting stronger on the squat will absolutely increase your deadlift. If your weak link is something like your upper back, your traps, your lats, right? Your grip, you're still not going to increase your deadlift any just from squatting. It's because that's no longer being limited by those muscles. Okay? But again, we want to clarify, we're not saying that the squat doesn't help with the deadlift, that it's not a good accessory, because it is. But like with any other accessory, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if the muscles involved in your squatting are stronger than the other muscles involved in the deadlift, you're not going to see an improvement because you're still going to be limited. You're going to be limited by your ability to maintain back position. And that's a lot of what it comes down to. It's not just grip, it's maintaining the correct back position for ideal leverages. Okay? And we need all of that upper back and middle back and everything else to be big and strong if we want to have a respectable deadlift. Now, I will state again, the hip extensors matter, and they matter a lot. But let's come back over to something like the good morning. The good morning can train that better. And that's one reason I'm very, very big on good mornings. The good morning carries over to both the squat and the deadlift. The good morning improves your squat tremendously. Good mornings can build the deadlift. Okay? So I lean more in the direction of, as a general supplemental lift for the deadlift, good morning is superior to a squat. But I don't want people to think that that means they shouldn't be squatting if they want a big deadlift, because it will help. And particularly if you find yourself on the conventional deadlift, if you really struggle to break it off the floor, okay, if you struggle to break it off the floor and you haven't been squatting, you have an easy fix. Because that will help resolve that just for no other reason than your quads. But then again, any exercise that builds the quads will help with that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.